I don't think most teenagers are wasting their lives because they don't care. I think they're wasting them because they believe they have more time than they actually do. That sounds dramatic. I don't mean that life is about to end. I mean something quieter. When you're 16, a year feels endless. Summer feels endless. Even next Monday feels far away. So it's easy to believe there's always another chance. I'll start next month. I'll learn that later. I'll talk to them another day. Then, somehow, another school year is over. The strange part is that nothing obviously went wrong. You just kept waiting for your real life to begin. Picture a student getting home from school. They throw their bag on the floor. I'll relax for 20 minutes. One video becomes another. Then another. Dinner, a few more videos. Some gaming, a little scrolling before bed. Tomorrow they'll be productive. Tomorrow they'll finally start learning that skill they've been thinking about. Tomorrow they'll go for a run. Tomorrow they'll read that book. Then tomorrow arrives and it quietly looks exactly like yesterday. I think almost everyone has lived some version of that day. The scary part isn't one afternoon, it's when that afternoon becomes an entire year. At first, I thought teenagers were simply distracted. Then something changed. I started remembering what it actually felt like to be that age. Everyone keeps asking you what you want to become. Teachers ask, parents ask, relatives ask, friends ask, as if you're supposed to have your entire future figured out before you've even figured yourself out. That's a strange amount of pressure for someone who's still discovering who they are. Maybe that's why so many teenagers don't move forward. Not because they have no ambition, because every choice feels like it has to be the perfect one. When everything feels important, doing nothing starts to feel safer than choosing the wrong path. But that's not the biggest thing I've noticed. Something even stranger happens. Imagine someone opening social media after school. Within 5 minutes, they've seen a teenager making thousands of dollars online. Someone else traveling the world. Another person with a perfect body. Someone their age driving an expensive car. By the time they put their phone down, their ordinary Tuesday suddenly feels like failure. Nothing in their own life actually changed. Only the comparison did. I wonder how many teenagers aren't disappointed in their lives. They're disappointed in the version of life they think they should already be living. That's a heavy expectation to carry before you've even become an adult. I still catch myself comparing my life to other people's highlight reels sometimes. Then I remember something. When I was younger, comparison had limits. You compared yourself to classmates, neighbors, people in your town. Now you can compare yourself to the most successful teenager on the planet before you've even eaten breakfast. Your brain doesn't really know the difference. It simply feels like everyone else is ahead. Maybe that's why so many young people feel behind even when they're exactly where they're supposed to be. There's another moment that keeps coming back to me. Picture a group of friends sitting together. Nobody is arguing, nobody is upset, but every few minutes someone reaches for their phone. The conversation pauses, someone laughs at a video nobody else has seen. Then silence. Then another notification. It's such a normal scene now that we barely notice it, but I wonder what teenagers are missing without realizing it. Some of the best memories people carry into adulthood aren't the planned moments. They're the conversations that lasted longer than expected. The stupid jokes nobody else would understand. The walk home after school. The moments that weren't exciting enough to record. Only meaningful enough to remember. Maybe I'm wrong. But I don't think teenagers are wasting their years because they're making terrible decisions every day. I think it's something much quieter than that. They're slowly trading unforgettable moments for endlessly repeatable ones. One more scroll, one more episode, one more evening that feels exactly like the last. And that's what makes it so difficult to notice. Because wasted years rarely feel wasted while you're living them. They just feel normal. And maybe that's exactly why they slip away so quietly. I remember talking to someone in their 20s who said something that stuck with me. I wish I'd been less afraid of looking stupid. At first, I thought they were talking about school. They weren't. They were talking about everything they never tried. The sport they wanted to play, the instrument they wanted to learn, the person they wanted to talk to, the videos they wanted to upload. None of those dreams disappeared because they weren't capable. They disappeared because embarrassment felt bigger than curiosity. I think that's one of the hidden costs of being a teenager. You're constantly aware that people are watching you, or at least it feels that way. The strange part is that everyone else is usually too busy worrying about themselves to notice as much as you think. At first, I thought growing older meant becoming more confident. Then something changed. I realized that most adults aren't fearless. They've simply learned something teenagers haven't had enough time to discover yet. Most embarrassing moments don't matter nearly as long as we imagine they will. Think about the last time someone else did something awkward. Maybe they stumbled over their words. Maybe they tripped while walking. Maybe they said something that didn't land. How often do you still think about it? Probably never. Yet when it happens to us, we remember it for years. It's funny how our own mistakes become documentaries while everyone else's become 15-second clips, but that's not the biggest reason these years matter. Something even stranger happens. The habits you build now have a quiet way of following you. Imagine two people who both turn 18. Neither of them has life figured out. Neither of them is especially talented. The difference isn't intelligence. It's what became normal during the years before. One got used to reading a little every week. The other got used to scrolling whenever life became quiet. One became comfortable talking to new people. The other became comfortable avoiding uncomfortable situations. Neither person made one dramatic decision. Thousands of tiny choices slowly became their personality. I don't think we become who we are because of one huge moment. More often, we become who we repeatedly practice being. I still catch myself thinking that life will somehow slow down later, that there will be a perfect time to learn something new, a perfect time to call someone, a perfect time to start. Then I remember something I've heard from almost everyone who's older. Time doesn't really slow down. If anything, it feels like it moves faster. Maybe that's because routines get stronger, responsibilities grow, free afternoons quietly disappear. That's why your teenage years are so unusual. Not because they're supposed to be perfect, because they're one of the few seasons of life where you're allowed to experiment without having everything figured out. You don't have to know exactly who you'll become, you just have to keep discovering who you might become. Maybe that's the mistake so many people make. They think these years are about becoming impressive, getting perfect grades, building the perfect body, making lots of money before 20. Social media loves those stories. Real life usually doesn't work that way. Maybe your teenage years aren't meant to prove who you are. Maybe they're meant to help you find out. There's a huge difference. One creates pressure, the other creates curiosity. And I think curiosity is a much kinder way to grow. At the beginning of this video, I said that I don't think most teenagers are wasting their lives because they don't care. I still believe that. I think most teenagers care deeply. They care about fitting in, about making the right choices, about not falling behind, about whether people accept them. Sometimes they care so much about getting life right that they're afraid to actually live it. Maybe that's the quiet tragedy. Not making mistakes. Avoiding experiences because you're trying so hard to avoid mistakes. And maybe that's the thought I want to leave you with. Years from now, you probably won't remember how many hours you spent scrolling. You probably won't remember the videos that kept you entertained for one evening. But you'll remember the conversation that changed the way you saw yourself. The friend who stayed after everyone else had gone home. The hobby you almost didn't try. The risk that made you feel alive. Those moments don't seem extraordinary while they're happening. They're just ordinary days that you're fully present for. Maybe that's why people become nostalgic. Not because the past was perfect. Because they didn't realize they were living the days they'd one day miss. So maybe your teenage years aren't disappearing because you're doing everything wrong. Maybe they're disappearing the same way every season of life does. One ordinary day at a time. The difference is that one day, you'll look back and realize those ordinary days were quietly becoming your story all along.